Welcome to the Liberty Mindset. Come and explore some of the ideas and issues facing our liberty. 2022 is an election year. As libertarians, we ask that you consider voting in the Liberty Mindset. Welcome, and thank you for your time. Welcome to the Liberty Mindset. My name's Gregor, and I'm with Jimmy. And Jimmy, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, yes, I'm Jimmy. I don't know, a millennial by definition. I feel like there's a lot of people in my age group that are libertarians, and it would be really nice to reach out to them and understand what they're doing. Just like my partner here, Gregor, we're in Washington County, Oregon, and yeah, hi.
Well, welcome and thank you for joining me. Jimmy and I decided, whoops, that's not changing. Cool. Jimmy, am I full screen on your video?
No.
Cool.
I mean, well, you're the bigger screen.
Okay, that's what I meant. You can see my full picture.
Yeah, I see you. Yeah.
I wonder why it's not switching on mine when I talk. That's interesting. I wonder what it's recording. Hopefully it's recording me right. Otherwise, I'm going to be this little tiny picture up on the top of my screen. And that, by the way, is what you get with a first-time podcast. I'm Gregor, and I'm the tail end of the boomer generation. I'm what most people consider to be mostly a pretty conservative, straight Christian white male, which automatically means I'm, lose a lot of points, I know. But I really thought it was important to, as a libertarian, to try to start the concept of the libertarian mindset. And again, we're not looking to tell people how to think. The whole idea is to sort of share what a liberty mindset really is. And it's really important for me personally that we try to get people thinking, because so much of what we do is not thinking. Everyone's just so busy reacting. So welcome to the Liberty Mindset. We're going to try to look at this, a lot of things locally in this podcast, but today we're going to look on something national, and just because it's super important. This episode is going to be focused on the First Amendment. And the First Amendment is, Congress shall make no law respecting to establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So what do you think about that, Jimmy?
Well, one thing when I think about the First Amendment is most of the focus always lands on one of those five freedoms. A lot of times people will focus on speech or religion, and I don't think that we think about the fact that the First Amendment encompasses all of it. And it encompasses all of it for a reason. These are five grounds in which the people who brought this together, the framers, decided they're being impinged upon with the British regime. And to this day, we still need all of these to keep the backbone of our country strong.
So true. I mean, history tells us so many things about why this is important. The first thing that's listed there, Congress shall make no law to establishment of religion. They don't realize that several things. First off, the people that first came to the Boston area, they were religious refugees, and they ended up leaving Great Britain, going to Holland, and then going from Holland to here, looking specifically for freedom of religion. People have heard of Guy Fawkes, and remember the 5th of November is something that people talk about mantras, and from the movie V is for Vendetta, the Guy Fawkes masks is very famous, but his whole thing was the fact that he could not be Protestant. He had to be Catholic according to the laws of the kingdom. And that later turned to Anglican, and that's what our founding fathers ran away from, was from a state-run church. And that's part of the reason they established it so hard, to say that the federal government wouldn't be an establishment of religion.
Right.
And as much as I didn't agree with President Obama, there's one thing he had right when he talked about the Bill of Rights. He talked about them about negative liberties,
Mhm.
but they're not negative individual liberties. They're never negative government liberties. And the whole idea is that it restrains what the government can do.
Yeah.
And so many of us sit there and have allowed the government, especially these last 2 years. I mean, we can talk about what the government's rights and responsibilities were in the midst of a pandemic.
Hmm. And they
But
encouraged on that way too much.
well, and that's my feeling too. They were trying to tell churches how to worship, and they were trying to tell people, what they could and couldn't do in their own belief systems. And I'm a big fan that that's not their
Even
choice. And
even in
that's
their own homes. I mean, they're
right.
telling you you couldn't even meet with family, and you couldn't meet in groups of more than 10 in some places, which is exact one of the things that really started the whole movement of how many people can get together for a group, even
Oh, yeah,
back
and
in the
there we go. Look at
1700s.
that.
Yeah.
And abridge the right of people to peaceably assemble. You
Yeah.
know? And the funny thing is, with all of that, here we are, the First Amendment. Congress shall make no rules.
Hmm.
And the scary part is Congress never made any of those rules.
Right.
They were just dictated by somebody.
Right. Somebody
And
who thought they had the power.
yeah, and we said, okay, you have the power, and went ahead and
Yeah.
did it. Now, I'm not here to debate masks or or the
Mm-mm.
concept of anything like that. We could,
No.
we can have debates on the science if you want at some point, but the real thing is that enacting or giving up those freedoms, what we did as people, is really has emboldened them, and we're going to see more of it. And we
Yeah.
have an election this year, and guess what? I'm fully expecting for someone to come out and say we can't do this, that, or the other thing because of insert crisis here.
Hmm.
Um, what is a free speech?
Free speech. Everybody feels like they have a different view of this. I feel like a lot of people think free speech is it's okay for me to say whatever I want to say, but not what other people are saying. And really, in the contrast of all, free speech is the ability to project a thought, an idea, even an emblem or music or art or anything of that nature, and just put it out to the free market. If people don't like it, you'll find out pretty quick. And if people think that's a great idea or a wonderful piece of art or a really cool thing, they're going to be emboldened and want to continue to do that as well, or empower that person to continue their work. um, and it's shifted a lot from what it originally was meant to be uh, over the last 200 and some odd years now. But it still means that not only am I allowed to say what I say, even if it sounds silly or ridiculous or cool, but so are you. Everybody has that equality and should have that equality. And stifling that just doesn't help anything.
Absolutely. And I'm not Catholic. My Christianity is not rooted in any specific um, organization.
Mhm.
The people I attend services with were very much an independent enclave. We're
Yeah,
just, we do our own thing based on what we feel the Bible says.
right.
But I know several years ago, I think, can't remember, it might have been, I want to say it was during the Clinton administration, an artist came out with a entire collection of art. And the art, one of the pieces that was center and made a big thing was called Piss Christ. And it was a pub glass full of urine with a crucifix turned up down and put in it. And that was what he called art. And I know there was a lot of people that um, thought that that was, should have been
Offensive.
stopped. It
Yeah.
should have been this, that, and the other thing. And as much as I hated it, freedom of speech dictates that we have to protect that kind of speech.
And yeah.
And it was pointless what his art was, in my opinion, but
Mhm.
he also had the right to do it.
And you're entitled to your opinion of not liking it, not wanting to spend time looking at it, not wanting to even, be in a place where it would exist. And that's your right,
Hmm.
you know, just like, yeah.
and now we're getting to a point where folks are not allowed to say what they want because corporations will do things. And this whole
Right.
cancel culture thing that we got going on because of what people say.
Yeah.
Um,
You lose your job, you can be kicked out of places, banned from places.
and as a libertarian, I'm a firm believer that the corporations can say, you know what, you don't represent us.
Right.
But on the other side of the coin, if a person is doing it on their own time in their own personal way, if I was a corporate guy, if it was my company, as long as you're not forcing us as a company to do things
And you're not wearing the garb of our company saying you represent our views.
exactly, then
Yeah.
it's like, I can't say anything, and I wouldn't, no matter
And
how much I disagreed with it.
it's interesting because even like when you look at things like as a somebody who works for the government, for the states, like they can't do anything like what we're doing here with the podcast, because if they side with it, a particular party, that goes against the rules for them even.
Yeah.
So different rules, different corporations and different jobs have these just odd, almost arbitrary things that really don't necessarily need to reflect them to begin with, and still
A-
the individual can have their views.
Yeah, and I have a friend who works for the state government of California, and he's pretty conservative, and I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to, get him in trouble or anything, but
Right, right,
I know he doesn't feel like he can say a lot of things because if he does, he'll lose his job. And he's
right.
like 4 years from retirement.
Oh yeah, that's
Um,
not the time to be loud.
and yeah, it's not the time to be blacklisted. So, I don't blame him for not wanting to say much. Um,
But it's still, it's that's so, that makes people feel so little and so small when they probably have wonderful ideas and they can never get them out to the people that could help them make them into grander, beautiful things.
truly.
And it's sad that that's become okay. People
Yeah,
just decide, I'm just going to be quiet. It's one thing to pick your battles, but something totally different just to be completely stifled.
I like that. Pick your battles. That's a good choice. One of the other things, and freedom of speech is this is a touchy subject, and we didn't talk about this ahead of time on purpose. So I hope
That's
I'm not
okay.
surprising you too much. But one of the things I see here is, especially here in Oregon, we have a very strong um, multifaceted gender community.
Mhm.
Um, and as a Christian, do I agree with the lifestyle? No. But do I have a right to condemn them or tell them what they can and can't do? No. That's
Right.
where my freedom of speech has to exercise. But
Mhm.
my question is, what does a person of your generation think of somebody who may or may not look like, I mean, if somebody specifically tells me I have to call them something they are not, and let's just leave it generic because it's not important which way it
Yeah.
goes.
Right.
Um, but where does their freedom of speech and my freedom of speech end in that regard? Do I have to call them by law what they ask me to?
I mean, there's legally, we don't have a whole lot of grounds on that. I mean, at
Mhm,
this point, that's still an ever-changing and growing part of our world right now.
mhm,
Now, I mean, out of respect for the individual, a lot of that'll depend on who is this person to you?
mhm.
Why do you interact with them on a daily basis? Is this a one-time occurrence? There's a lot of layers there. I have a friend who lives out in Missouri, and she's absolutely fabulous. I love her to death, but she very much so stands on a very conservative Christian side of she can't really come to terms with it. And her and I've had long debates about it, where if she's looking at someone who clearly to her physically looks like, let's say, female, but they want to be called male, she has a hard time grasping that and remembering to do it. She doesn't feel like she's required to either. So it blurs a line. I mean, at what point do we do it out of respect, and at what point do we do it because we have to?
Right. Well, and there's a difference between those two. I agree.
Mhm.
Growing up in Southern California, here's a secret. I'm a recovering Californian. Um, but I was surrounded by people of all sexual
Yeah.
orientations, and as a general rule, if somebody is striving to be a certain way, I've been torn on whether it's a lie to continue with that conversation in their whatever choice.
Right.
But part of me has chosen to my best of my ability. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and insult somebody and tell them,
Mhm.
you know, you're not.
Right.
And if I accidentally say he or she or stuff, or said, you know, and don't get me started on things like Z,
Yeah.
J, and
Oh
Zy.
yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. If it's
Um,
not in the normal vernacular of the language, then
yeah,
there's reason to be
I'm gonna
confused.
forget to use it, so I'm
Hmm.
just like, sorry. Now,
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't understand. It's not a matter of hate. It's just a matter of I'm
And
old and can't learn new tricks.
those people need to have some understanding and some compassion for the fact that they're making a request that's outside of a good chunk of people's normal. So it's going to slip. I have a friend here in Portland, and every now and again I call them the wrong um, one. They are non-binary, so I'll say she or he instead of they. And they're very androgynous. Go either direction. If you saw them on the street, you probably wouldn't know which
Yeah.
one to pick. So, and it's not an insult, but they understand that they're asking something of the rest of the world that isn't normal yet.
Well, so and that is an interesting concept, because to me that it shows some maturity on your friend's part,
Mhm.
but also, you know, we already talked that offensive or even hate speech, I suppose, has to be protected, right? That,
Right.
you know, because if we can't say the bad things, we can't say the good things. Someone's going to say
Well,
that
yeah.
good things are bad.
It goes
Um,
along the lines of if you don't have any good, then you're only gonna see bad. If you only see bad, you're never gonna see the good. So you need to have a balance of both to understand and have drive and respect for them.
mhm.
And you have to be able to call when somebody has a really bad idea, you have to be able to go, hey, you have a really bad idea.
Yeah, that's not good. I
Yeah.
think that's a good idea.
I don't know if that's
Um,
right. Yeah.
yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Um, but where I was going with this is that, do I have a responsibility to,
As a libertarian, do you have a responsibility
yeah, as a
to
libertarian, as a responsibility, do I have a responsibility to um, worry about your feelings? I mean, I'm
mm,
not saying that I wouldn't as a human being,
right.
but yeah, one of
Hmm.
something that I always noticed is offense, and and this is my personal phrase. I may have heard it somewhere, and if I don't know who to attribute it to,
It's
then
okay.
I'm sorry. But offense can only be taken; it cannot be given.
Yes, I love that
And
quote.
you know, an offense is a choice.
Mhm.
It's actually literally on the
It's a
person's part who is offended.
it's
Is
a battle they chose to pick
Well,
in
and
that
even
case.
their reaction to it, they chose that
Yeah.
reaction. They chose to be offended.
And it goes back
And
to your whole talking earlier about how people are just reacting, they're not thinking.
mhm,
So if they're not thinking about the fact that that was a hard thing that maybe we fumbled when we were talking to them, and they reacted to the fact that we just had a space cadet moment and didn't give us the grace to understand that we're trying.
mhm,
I think we have some part of me feels like we have an obligation to try,
yeah,
but we're not perfect, we're not infallible.
true. That's true. Well, anything else you want to bring up?
Mm. Well, I mean, with freedom of speech, freedom of religion, we've got freedom of assembly, and the freedom of the press.
Freedom of the press. Did you hear the news
Yeah.
this week that what was it? News agency, I want to say USA Today, found had to fire one of their reporters because they reported 23 articles that had no foundation in reality.
What?
Yeah, they quietly fired them and took down 23 articles that they found to be
Oh my
completely
goodness.
false. So they made it through the entire editing process.
So that went through like at least a half dozen hands and sets of eyeballs
Right. And they also
that just was like, okay, sure.
and they turned out, including one of the things was a famous article apparently on the people of Ukraine who were, you know, fighting, you know, just normal people who were fighting, and it turns out all of that was made up. I'm not saying the folks of Ukraine are not fighting. I'm just saying that
Right.
this article was they found out there was absolutely no information. It was a fantasy of the writers. But
Wow.
does the press have a responsibility to be truthful?
That's a really good question. I mean, there's
Based on
a
freedom of speech.
societal expectation in a way that if the press is going to post something, if it's not going to be, truthful or found in fact, that they're supposed to say something about it.
Right.
But is that actually written into any documentation of these agencies anywhere that what they're sending out is truthful? Because you have like the Onion and
Mhm.
stuff who post stuff, and
Well,
the
yeah,
Onion did
Cleon,
trick quite a few people.
Babylon B, they're satires.
Yeah, Babylon. Yeah, they're satire and they're great and they have the fun places to be. But there are people out there who would look at one of those articles and think it was real.
Hmm.
But how much of that onus goes on the article writer versus the person who's supposed to be fact checking what they're reading?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a difference. And the Babylon Bee is like very clear that they're doing satire.
Oh yeah, no,
The
definitely.
Onion is as well, but USA Today
Mhm.
is supposed, and CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, and take your insert news organization here. Those should have an expectation that they should be honest, and yet.
There was this Edgar Allan. So there was Edgar Allan Poe submitted a story that was supposed to be like a satire joke. Um, and I think it was about an airplane going across the Atlantic. And he had submitted it to a local paper, and it was supposed to be this just tongue-in-cheek type thing, and people believed it. People were like lined up around the block to get this newspaper article, and he's outside of his local printing press telling people not to do it. It's not real, don't believe it. And nobody would believe him. So I mean, this whole like fact checking thing, this has been going on for centuries. We've just made a huge stink of it over the last 10 years. But I mean, like, he's running around and he wrote it in a pen name, but he wrote it. He's saying, guys, I didn't mean it.
Oh, I'm gonna have to look that up. That's fascinating.
But it just, I mean, it's been going on for a long time. And when people would submit to presses and to newspapers, there wasn't really necessarily a code of conduct of what you're sending in. Because if Edgar Allan Poe can send in a pen named story that's supposed to be just a joke and then convince multiple places that you could fly across the Atlantic now way before you could.
Right.
I mean, it's a question then goes back to the actual publication of what they're doing and what their goal is. Because like you said, the Onion and Babylon Bee, they have clearly defined themselves as a satire news source. And if you want to find out like what it is they're poking fun at, you can go look that up. But yeah, at what point does the actual source, the media and the news source, need to actually say, hey, by the way, this is just opinion, or hey, by the way, this is done in fact. And then there's a lot of right-wing, left-wing, libertarian, middle of the ground places too that aren't necessarily going to show you the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
And then we start getting into the filter bubbles that people encounter.
The filter bubbles. That's a whole conversation, but I don't think we have time for that.
No, but it is something that people are encountering with the media and the freedom of speech and freedom of press, is they'll only get certain things about it, and that fits to their needs.
Yeah.
And we'll have to do a different episode on filter bubbles maybe, but it's definitely interesting.
In summation there, I would encourage you, whenever you read something, the old phrase, check but verify, believe but trust but verify is not actually a bad thing to do. Is if you say, okay, well, that's one news source at KZN, and make sure that you're checking from different sources, because half the time I go and look up an article that says something a little bit fantastic.
Right.
All of them are referring to this other article over here, and this article, it's not like data. So, or
just a clip of what somebody said completely taken out of context. That's a pretty common one too. And it's not that what the person who wrote it or what the newspaper is saying is wrong. It's just that if you take anything out of context, you can turn it into whatever you want.
Yeah.
One thing I had read about when I was doing some research on the First Amendment, I thought was interesting, is that the First Amendment is neither right or left. It's meant to be, you straight and down the middle. So it's not supposed to lean one way or the other. It's just, it gets played on towards the right and the left so much and tugged on this people think of it as such a linear thing, but so many things in life aren't linear anymore. As you get older and as we understand more, we realize that things are much grander.
Yeah. Very true. Very true.
And the Libertarian Party being a bigger growing aspect of that is proving, because we don't fit on a line between the two parties.
No, we're kind of this blob in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, we're off kind of
Yeah.
over here somewhere.
Over here, over there.
Here's the right and the left on the stage, and we're in the amphitheater.
Actually, I mean, I spent, several years as a registered Republican in California. When I came to Oregon, I switched over to the Libertarian Party.
Mhm.
And, I did that because it's like, I'm tired of what the Republicans are doing.
Right.
Now, I'll admit that the Libertarian Party for me has its own personal challenges.
Mhm.
I'm, still a believer that we have to have some sort of structure in order for society to exist.
I believe that too.
Well, but some libertarians don't, and that's fine.
Yeah. And I get some think it all needs to go burning down, and good for them if they want to figure out how to make that work.
Yeah, well, and Michael Malice, he's an infamous libertarian. He has a podcast called Welcome. You're welcome. And
Okay.
he's he's pretty interesting, but he claims to be an anarchist, and his view on anarchy is absolutely beautiful, to be honest.
But
He
it's
wrote
almost
a
too
book
beautiful.
called,
Is it almost too beautiful?
Oh, it is. That's to me, for me,
Idealistic.
that's the problem.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called The Anarchist Cookbook.
Oh
And
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know who you're talking about.
and it was basically a collection of essays from anarchists.
Mhm.
And when I read essays for anarchists, there's so many things that I like, yeah. And there's so many other things though that, and the thing from my point of view is, I think humans are capable of amazing things, but they're also
Mhm.
capable of horrible things
And stupid things.
and stupid things. And
There's
the
equal sides on all those.
right. And the truth of the matter is that we will always be imperfect.
Yes.
We're never going to get it right completely. And to me, that's one of the joys of the U.S. Constitution, is because people don't often realize that our U.S. Constitution is actually our second try.
Right.
We had the American Revolution, and then we had a second revolution that was shotless.
Right.
Um,
A lot of people don't remember that from high school or middle
Right.
school, and
They
unless
forget
you're
about the
a
Articles
history
of
buff.
Confederation, which were a little bit too loose for anything to be
Right.
done, and things were falling apart. So they came up with the 1791 Constitution, which is essentially what we have now with amendments.
Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
But and to me, that's but part of the joy of this country is that we're supposed to be bound by ideas versus an individual.
Yeah.
And that's what we got away from. There's another book called The 5,000-Year Leap, and now I forgot who wrote it, but if you look up 5,000-Year Leap, you'll easily find it. And it talks about how amazing we went from monarchy to a republic, and how big of a huge leap that was, because when you look at history, how many things hadn't really changed, over thousands of years, and everything, for the most part, with few exceptions. Even the Roman Republic wasn't that much of a republic, or it didn't last very long as a republic. It was more of a dictatorial, they had Caesar, and then with the Republic advisors. But I mean, we're an exception in the fact that we have a document that guides everything out and sets it out where your rights are protected from the government versus
And from the get-go.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait to a certain age to get any of these rights. The moment you are born on American soil, you have these rights.
And that's really cool, and that's, to me, part of the beauty of this country. I've done a little bit of traveling, which I'm sure over the course of this podcast we'll talk about. But I've been on 3 of the 7 continents, and to about 12 different countries, and plus the 48 states in the United States. And I can tell you pretty honestly, there's nothing better.
Yeah.
At least when my experience. Now,
The rate of people wanting to come here proves that it's still people want to be here for reasons.
yeah.
And a lot of them go back to what we're allowed, what we're given as rights, as opposed to what they're being oppressed for
Mhm.
in their own home state or home country.
Yeah. Well, and Trudeau in Canada recently, talked about, and we'll be talking about the Second Amendment next week or in 2 weeks. That is our goal, and which is, I'm sure, will be another quiet and uncontested conversation. But Trudeau just talked about how in Canada you don't have a right for self-defense.
Which is weird because I was pretty certain that you had the right as long as you backed up, and it had to be a rifle, like you had to back up to the wall.
Well, and
And it might be a province thing.
well, it could be a province thing, but also their rights and responsibilities are based off of the Magna Carta, just like
Right.
us. And the Magna Carta required people to have arms for self-defense. It was,
Right.
part of the deal under King John when they started the Magna Carta.
I wouldn't want to live in Canada or any place that's super rural with things that can come charging at my house and take down a wall like a moose without something to stop the moose. I mean, even just that alone.
Moose are dangerous.
They are very
People
dangerous.
don't realize that animals, just because of their size, are dangerous. Are moose
Right.
terribly evil? No, they just
No.
plant eaters. But
They get scared and they go forward and they don't stop, just like elephants. So,
well, and the most dangerous animal in Africa is the hippo.
well,
It
yeah.
The number of deaths by lion, thousands of percent. I mean, it's huge
Yeah.
because the hippos accidentally run people over. It's not that
Yeah.
they attack them.
No,
How they do
they're
that,
not like
but
going out of their way to eat them or anything. They just
right.
get caught in the crossfire
Mm,
and you can't get away from them.
yeah.
Um, it's interesting, when you look at the way you were saying that you came from Southern California and Republican, and I grew up in Washington and I grew up with a very Democratic family, and I voted Democratic for quite a bit, even though I didn't always agree. And sometimes I felt like I was voting for the lesser of two evils. It wasn't until moving to Oregon that my husband and I were like, look, this we have to pick a party, because you can just vote in whatever primaries up there you want. You don't have to pick a party ahead of time. So we decided to pick the Libertarian Party, and we were doing a lot more research on it. We're like, wow, this actually does seem like a good place for us, views wise, even though the views stretch so much on what you believe and don't believe. Like, I'm somewhere around an agnostic atheist at times, but I was raised in the Swedish Covenant Church,
Mm.
and I was raised Southern Baptist as well. So I've got a little dabbling on both sides there. There's one thing that my grandmother used to say that I always felt was weird until more recently. She used to say, when you're young, you're a Democrat. As you get older, you become more conservative. And I think part of that might be because you understand your rights more, and
Mhm.
you understand what it would mean if those rights were taken away from you.
Yeah.
And when you're young, you don't feel like anything's going to happen.
There's truth. You're invincible, and when you're young, I remember being invincible.
Yeah, I remember being a teenager and thinking if I jumped out of the window, I'd be fine, or
Yeah, well,
something.
second story windows were not strangers to me. But
Mm-mm.
anyway, well, that's a misspent youth. Well, in 2 weeks, we'll come back with the Second Amendment. And also, I'd like to invite, we'll have email contact information down in the description. This will be appearing on Rumble and YouTube, and we'll look at having an audio podcast coming to you as well. So I'd like to thank the audience for joining us this week.
Yes,
I hope
thank
our
you all.
discussion was stimulating at least. And if
Thought
you'd like to
provoking.
participate, you can shoot us an email and give us some information that you want us to cover in the future, whether it's about the Second Amendment. We're going to try to go through more or less all of the amendments just to kick off our podcast. But at some point, we would like to, make sure we bring the audience in and participate so we can all talk.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd love to hear
Jimmy,
from
thank
you.
you for joining me this week, and we will see you in 2 weeks, which will be the first Wednesday in July, which I think is the 5th. I want to say the 5th of July.